Hi, I'm Jeff Fordson of JeffCars.com, host of Auto Trends with JeffCars.com. Over the years, I've shared my car buying advice with such staples as the Washington Post, Black Enterprise, Essence, and AOL.com. And I've also used my high-energy car buying clinic, which is housed with the Library of Congress, to help consumers navigate the car buying process. And now, each month, you can join me in the passenger seat, listening in to some of my in-depth interviews with some of the auto industry leading pioneers and influencers, get the inside scoop on the latest new cars, learn about the most current recalls, and grab a service tip to keep you and your ride on the road. So for now, buckle up and enjoy the ride as we take a spin together, exploring all facets of the automotive industry. Today, one of the leading authorities on self-driving vehicles joins us in the driver's seat. We'll take a trip to Vegas for the global reveal of the world's best-selling hybrid, and we'll take a ride in the first Fiat-based Jeep. But first, Shelley will tell you about the latest recalls from both Jeep and Nissan and what's coming down the pipeline with Audi and Volkswagen as it relates to their diesel recall.
In recall news this week, we have Audi, Jeep, Nissan, and Volkswagen. First up, Nissan is recalling more than 298,000 model year 2012 to 2015 Versa sedans and model year 2014 to 2015 Versa Notes. The affected vehicles have a center console trim panel that may catch the driver's shoe and delay the transition from the accelerator pedal to the brake pedal. If the problem is not resolved, this will increase the risk of a crash. Nissan will modify the console trim panel. The recall is expected to begin by mid-October. Next up, more than 158,000 model year 2014 Jeep Cherokees are being recalled. In the affected vehicles, use of the front windshield wipers on dry glass may cause damage to the body control module, which could result in wipers not working properly when raining. To resolve the issue, Jeep will install a part to protect the body control module from damage. And last on our list, Audi and VW are embroiled in a public relations nightmare after allegations surfaced recently regarding the automaker installing illegal software on more than 482,000 of its diesel engine vehicles so that they would comply with the EPA and California's emission standards. The device would activate the car's emission controls during testing, but deactivate them in real-world driving. The device Audi and VW installed lowers both the car's performance and fuel economy. The vehicles are also emitting harmful pollutants at rates 40 times the acceptable level. The affected vehicles are the 2009 to 2015 Jettas, Beetles, and Golfs, the 2014 to 2015 Passats, and the 2009 to 2015 Audi A3s. To rectify the issue, the German automaker is working on software updates to address the concern. In the meantime, the cars are safe to drive, and like some automakers who have been involved in similar ethical cases, they might also decide to offer some type of compensation to the affected owners. Recall repairs are always free and should be performed by an authorized dealership. To find out more about recalls or to check if there is an existing recall on your vehicle, access the 17-digit vehicle identification number, which is located on the white label inside of the driver's door. Once the number has been retrieved, visit safercar.gov or jeffcars.com, accessing all outstanding recalls. Also, every Monday, the latest weekly recalls are announced on jeffcars.com. For Auto Trends with jeffcars.com, I'm Shelley Danzy. And Jeff, back over to you.
Next up, first part of our two-part interview about self-driving vehicles. Today we have with us James Anderson, who has become one of the leading authorities on self-driving vehicles. With all the autonomous safety features out there today, such as radar-activated cruise control systems to lane-keeping assist systems to forward collision alert braking systems, it's quite obvious we're moving away from the era of the Flintstones, where Fred and Barney literally used their feet to stop vehicles, to the Jetsons, who first gave us a glimpse of self-driving vehicles. Anderson, a Yale-educated lawyer who currently serves as a senior behavior scientist and a professor at the Pittsburgh-based RAND Corporation was a part of a team that put together an extensive report for policymakers on autonomous vehicles back in 2014. We're delighted to have him here today on Auto Trends with JeffCars.com, and we've got an extensive conversation that we're going to have today to enlighten us, to tell us more about the future of self-driving vehicles. Welcome, James.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Oh, boy, I hope you're ready for us. I've got so many questions about self-driving vehicles. Let's start out first. Before we start talking about it, let's tell us a little bit about the RAND Corporation and what they actually do.
Sure. The RAND Corporation is sort of was the first what's now known as kind of a think tank. Towards the end of World War II, a bunch of academics who had been worked on the war effort were going to go back to universities, and some folks realized that was unfortunate, and that wasn't such a great idea. So as a result, received some funding to keep the academics on the federal government payroll, and to really sort of assist the federal government in trying to address a variety of issues. Since that beginning, we've shifted and now cover a sort of a wide range of public policy issues. We pride ourselves on being nonpartisan and objective, and nearly all of our research is based on some sort of empirical analysis of the situation.
Okay, so James, you're part of a think tank, and I came across a report, a study that you actually led back in 2014 dealing with autonomous vehicles. How did you become a part of this committee?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I was in line to have my picture taken for my badge, for my my office badge, so I get in the building in the morning. And I was chatting with the person next to me, who was a roboticist who had recently graduated from Carnegie Mellon University. And I was asking her what she was working on there, and this was about 8 years ago, and she said, "Oh, I work on cars that can drive themselves." And I was quite skeptical, and said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. I remember watching the Jetsons as a kid, but those don't exist." And she said, "Well, actually, the technology is coming along pretty well, but the engineers are really concerned about the legal and the liability issues associated with this." And so as a result, and I told him that I'm a lawyer and I'm interested in these issues, and so I'd be happy to work on something with you on this. And so we were able to get a little bit of funding to do some early research on this issue.
And what year was this? You mentioned when you were about to take this picture and you had this conversation.
This was in 2000, actually the spring of 2007.
Okay, spring of 2007. All right, so tell us a little bit more about this. So you've actually had an opportunity to, well, not drive, but actually be a co-passenger in one of these vehicles, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so
and it's sort of uncanny and a little disconcerting, but one sort of quickly becomes accustomed to how it works. It was the first time I did this was actually at a conference of automotive engineers, and they had set the computer to sort of accelerate and brake quite hard. So it was a bit more like a amusement park ride than I think we'll actually see when it's introduced to the public.
Okay. And how much time did you spend in the vehicle? And was it being controlled by a computer or was it being controlled by a human? Give us a clearer, more descriptive picture of it.
Sure, it was some kind of SUV. This was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the computer was controlling the whole thing, and there was a sort of a backup, sort of safety driver in the front seat, ready to take over if there were any problems, but there weren't, and it handled just regular traffic, and it was really it was quite impressive.
Okay. What was your thoughts after actually spending time in this driverless vehicle, so to speak? Do you see a future for it, or are you ready like most of us? You got to realize, I don't know about you, but there's a rite of passage when we become somewhere between 15 to 16 to 17, depending upon what state you live in, and we get our driver's license, or we get something similar to that. With driverless vehicles coming along, what role will this play?
That's a good question, and I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, even now, there's a lot of data that suggests that the younger generation, the millennials, and their younger folks still, are a lot less interested in driving, and a lot more interested in their in their cell phones than we were, and than older generations are and were. So even apart from potential self-driving cars, there seems to be a little bit of a shift away from the car as a rite of passage and sort of a symbol of freedom. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how this develops.
Well, let me ask you this, James. Are you ready to concede your driver's license yet to a self-driving vehicle?
I'm sorry, I just missed that bit. Am I ready to?
Are you ready to give up your driver's license for a self-driving vehicle?
Well, if they were available today, I'd be tempted. I mean, it sort of depends. I mean, there's certainly something that's satisfying about driving on a beautiful country road. That's a lot of fun on a gorgeous day in a convertible. But of course, the reality of driving for most people most of the time is not that.
Okay, so let me take you back just a little bit. So back in 1939 at the New York World's Fair, which you're aware of, there was some talk at that point that maybe in the 60s that we would see self-driving vehicles. So when do you expect for us to actually see the first self-driving vehicles on the road that we as consumers will be actually driving? And before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about some of the different companies, automakers, some of the technology companies that's actually working on or that's actually involved in the self-driving vehicles.
Well, sure. There's sort of, I would say they're kind of two models of kind of progression towards self-driving vehicles. One is the sort of traditional automotive OEM, original equipment manufacturer, and I think their vision is sort of an incrementalist one.
Okay,
where
so let's make sure the listeners understand. So when we mention OEM, we're talking about actually automakers who are involved in this. So I just want to make sure our listeners understand what it means from an OEM standpoint.
Sure. No, exactly. Ford, GM, Chrysler, Volkswagen, Toyota, all the sort of major manufacturers are sort of doing research in this area, and the focus, I think, of their efforts and their sort of vision is that there'll be sort of an incrementalist. It'll sort of come gradually, and so you see this in terms of adaptive cruise control being introduced, lane keeping function, so the car will keep itself in a lane. The automatic braking is available as an option on a number of vehicles. So the sort of vision there, and then probably the next sort of steps will be, I think GM's announced that they're going to introduce something they will call Super Cruise, which is sort of a combination of adaptive cruise control and lane keeping. So that's sort of a gradual move towards a vision where the car can completely drive itself. The challenge with that vision and with that path partly comes from the interactions of the car with the human, because the research suggests that human beings are just not very good at tasks that require them sort of to be constantly vigilant and ready to take over at a moment's notice. They sort of quickly over-rely on the machinery and the automation. There was one early test where apparently, after a driver was in one of these cars and told that they had to, sit there and be ready to take over, and it got really boring pretty quickly, and so they crawled in the back seat and took a nap. So
hold on, stop for a second, James. So they crawled in the back seat and took a nap. So let's talk about how was the vehicle driving and how did everything progress from there?
Well, this was at a test track, so
Okay.
this was a relatively early test, and one of the things that the test was designed, it wasn't so much a test of the car as a test of how humans are going to interact with the car, and so the concern, and this was just a sort of a particularly vivid example of it, is that getting humans to pay attention and be ready to take over is hard. And there's the hard part about this sort of gradualist vision where you have the car driving itself with the human as a backup that's ready to go is making sure that human really is ready to back up. The other sort of very related issue is making sure that humans understand what the car can and can't do, and when it's safe to rely upon the car and when it's not. And there's some research in aviation that suggests that can be a challenging issue as well. When pilots can sometimes over rely on their autopilots or don't fully understand their function. So that's sort of the one sort of vision of how we get from here to a vision or to a future where cars are fully self-driving. An alternative vision is one that has been pursued by Google, which is really to try to jump to a world in which you don't even need a steering wheel, and so you sort of sidestep all the tricky human-computer interaction issues by really trying to take the human out of it as much as possible. And you deal with the safety issues, not by having a human backup ready to take over, but by doing it at sort of low speeds in a more confined environment, at least initially. And so that's sort of an alternative path that's being pursued. It'll be quite interesting to see moving forward. I expect we'll see a lot of progress in both those paths, and to see sort of again what happens, whether one approach seems to trump the other, or just kind of how it all plays out.
Could you tell us more about, and I know you track this whole autonomous movement with automobiles. Could you tell us about one of the recent trips that was made across country from the Silicon Valley area where technology is king, and I think the vehicle actually started from there, and a individual actually guided the vehicle from there all the way to the New York Auto Show, which is obviously from West Coast to East Coast. Could you tell us more about that particular vehicle?
Yeah. So Delphi is a company that produces a lot of systems for automobile manufacturers, and I think it was spun out of GM, 40 years ago or something like that. Anyway, but they were sort of, I think, the leading sponsors of a vehicle that drove across country and apparently required sort of human intervention only sort of a handful of times. I think the statistic I saw that it was sort of self-driving 99% of the time. Interestingly, there was and something that hasn't been mentioned as much is that a Carnegie Mellon University team did something very similar back in 1999 or 1998 in a hands-free trip across the country. That in the publicity surrounding this latest trip, people tend to forget about that history.
Okay, as we move forward, let's talk more about the infrastructure. What's going to need to be put in place by the government in order to make self-driving vehicles work? And the reason I ask this, we're still in this process also trying to figure out electric vehicles. And I had an expert on recently where we talked about electric vehicles only represented less than 0.5% of the total U.S. auto sales. And the reason that it's getting snagged right now are experiencing concerns as far as in growing is because, first of all, the infrastructure is not in place. There's not enough charging stations that's in place right now to make it work. And then also there may need to be government incentives in order to stimulate this, in order to encourage consumers to purchase electric vehicles since they're out of the range of the average consumer. So as we look at self-driving vehicles, again, what infrastructure needs to be put in place by the government to make this work?
Well, that's a good question, and it's somewhat of an open question right now. I mean, the history is sort of interesting because a lot of folks who were working on these issues in the sort of the 60s or 70s, and certainly the sort of 1940 World's Fair vision was going to be a very infrastructure dependent and an infrastructure intensive manifestation. So you'd have cars on specialized lanes, you'd have special roads, you might have magnets laid in the pavement. You had a whole infrastructure designed around these vehicles. The problem, of course, with that is it's really, really expensive. And the idea of tearing up all of our roadways and replacing it with some kind of special road, I don't know how much it would cost, but it certainly, I think, would be cost prohibitive. And it was actually there were some projects sponsored by DARPA in the early 2000s that really sort of put the focus on true autonomy and vehicles that did not depend upon any specialized outside infrastructure. So it will be interesting. I mean, there's been kind of this big shift away from a vision that required specialized and expensive infrastructure towards one that requires a lot less. And there's still some sort of divisions in the community about the extent to which specialized infrastructure will be required. One sort of useful kind of infrastructure is essentially a V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle communications network that the federal government has been promoting. And the idea here is that it allows vehicles to share information about the direction and speed of the vehicle with other vehicles around them, and to communicate potentially other information as well.
And what will be the advantage of that, James, from a consumer standpoint?
A few things. I mean, one is it allows a more autonomous vehicle to make information and make decisions based on that additional information. So rather than relying just upon the autonomous vehicle's sensors, laser or vision or what have you, this would be another a way of getting information. I mean, one sort of example would be if an ambulance is coming along, it could sort of send this radio signal out, and actually cars could automatically move out of the way. Or for collision avoidance, if a car is approaching an intersection and there's already a car in it, this would be another way for the car to know that about that car and trigger some kind of automatic braking mechanism.
Interesting.
I mean, you can, in theory, you could do more complicated things with this as well. You could enable platooning so that one vehicle sort of leads a trail of other vehicles that are very, very closely spaced. And so you get substantial fuel economy benefits from that. And then only the lead vehicle would have to steer, and the other vehicles are just essentially like cars in a train. So there are a variety of things you could do using this set of technologies. But other folks who are more skeptical of it, sort of say it's nice, but it's not necessary to get autonomous vehicles.
Okay. Well, James, we are going to continue this conversation on another show because I've got so many more questions to ask you as far as the additional benefits of self-driving vehicles. We're also going to talk about it from, now with you being a lawyer, I've got to ask you some questions about the insurance industry and the personal liability. Is it against OEMs, or is it against personal insurance going to affect consumers? Will it be less for consumers to get insurance with these, what we're looking at with the self-autonomous vehicles? But we're going to hold it off until the next show.
My pleasure, Jeff.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next up, new car reviews. In the garage this week, we're showcasing the 2015 Fiat-based Jeep Renegade Trailhawk and the much-anticipated all-new 2016 Toyota Prius. First up is the boxy Jeep Renegade, which shares a platform with its Italian sibling, the Fiat 500X, has loads of personality with its cartoon-like exterior design. The Renegade is the first Jeep to enter such a partnership with the American icon. While we were initially somewhat skeptical about the partnership, Both design teams and engineering teams have managed to keep each vehicle's identities. In fact, the vehicles are so radically different, the Renegade starts out the gate at approximately $2,000 lower than the Fiat with an MSRP of $18,995 and can rise up to $33,000 when fully optioned. We were so fortunate to get our hands on an Army Green Jeep Renegade Trailhawk. The Trailhawk is the only Renegade not available in a 4x2 configuration. Our test vehicle was outfitted with only one option: dual removable roof panels. Depending upon the mood and feel of the occupants, one top or both tops could be popped out. Having both tops popped out easily convert the Mini Jeep to a true open-air vehicle like its big sibling, the Wrangler. The Renegade is available in 4 trims, a manual or an automatic, and in either a 4x2 or a 4x4 configuration. The pint-sized Jeep can be powered by the standard 1.4-liter 160 horsepower engine or the Fiat 500X Share 2.4-liter engine with a 9-speed transmission which pumps out 180 horsepower. Unfortunately, there were some downsides to our little Jeep. The Jeep borrows Fiat's electronic parking system. In our eyes, a rugged Jeep needs a hand-pulling brake system for a vehicle that is rated to take on the trails. And contrary to popular belief, Jeep proves that a compact vehicle does not always equal fuel efficiency. The Renegade has one of the lowest combined gas mileages in the segment. Furthermore, due to the small tank size, expect to make frequent fill-ups. And if gas mileage is a concern of yours, we had a chance to make it out to Vegas for a lively celebration of the 4th generation Prius. The world's hybrid leader is expected to achieve a 10% improvement in combined gas mileage over the current model, which means we should expect the 5-passenger fuel sipper to garner near a combined gas mileage of 55 miles per gallon. The 4th generation Prius has even added a new eco trim, which is expected to squeeze out even more mileage. Like the aura of just being in Vegas, Toyota has attempted to jazz up the 2016 Prius by borrowing styling cues from its hydrogen fuel cell car, by changing the driving dynamics, widening the vehicle, lowering the height, and by stretching the length. We can't wait until we get a chance to get behind the wheel. The 2016 Prius goes on sale next year. With hybrid sales being down as a result of the availability of cheap gas, we expect pricing, once it's announced, to be within close proximity of the 2015 model, which starts out the gate at $24,040. For photos and more information about the Jeep Renegade, the Toyota Prius, and other new vehicles, check out our new car reviews and our car buying pricing guide. Drive over to jeffcars.com. Until next time, buckle up. The executive producer and host of Auto Trends with jeffcars.com is Jeff Fortson, and the production manager is John Bill. To hear the extended version of our In the Driver's Seat interview, drive over to jeffcars.com. To stay connected, sign up for our e-automotive newsletter or join us on Twitter @JeffCars. Until next month, buckle up and drive safely.